Ever heard about the marriage penalty when it comes to taxes?
Uh-huh.
Well, today we're going deep on that.
Okay.
But with a twist,
Yeah.
we're going to see how it actually hits people differently
Mm-hmm.
based on race and ethnicity here in the U.S.
Interesting.
And get this, we've got a brand new study hot off the presses from the Office of Tax Analysis.
Oh, wow.
They just published this thing in January.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
get ready for some surprising facts.
It's always fascinating to me, how a study like this uses actual tax data
Right.
to really look into potential biases
Mm.
in a system that most folks just assume is,
Yeah.
fair and square.
It's like taxes. We
Nope.
just think they are what they are.
Exactly.
But then this study's like, hold on a sec.
Yeah.
There might be some hidden stuff going on, especially when you start looking at things like race and ethnicity.
Absolutely.
Okay, so first things first.
Yeah.
Can we break down what exactly are these marriage penalties and bonuses everyone keeps talking about?
Sure. So basically, it all comes down to this. When you file your taxes jointly as a married couple,
Mm-hmm.
it can actually change how much you owe
Okay.
compared to if you both just filed as single people.
So you're saying just by getting married,
Yep.
you could end up paying more or less.
That's exactly it.
That seems a little weird, doesn't it?
It does, right? Because we always think of the tax system as this neutral thing.
Yeah.
But when it comes to marriage, it's really not neutral at all.
Mm.
You could have two couples with the same exact combined income,
Okay.
but their individual incomes are structured differently,
Yeah.
and they could end up with completely different tax bills.
Whoa, that seems like it could be a big deal.
Oh, it definitely can be. And to add another layer to all this,
Okay.
in 2023, marriage bonuses were actually more common than penalties.
Really?
Yeah, 53% of couples got a bonus
Wow.
versus 37% who got hit with the penalty, which, could be because of changes to tax laws
Mm-hmm.
or even broader economic trends
Like
that are affecting how income is spread around.
So is there any way to figure out, predict
Mm-hmm.
whether you're more likely to get the bonus or the penalty?
Well, your income and your family structure play a huge role.
Yep.
For instance, couples where one person makes a lot more,
Yeah.
they're way more likely to get a bonus because filing jointly lets them use those lower tax brackets.
Right. That makes sense. What about couples where both people work,
Uh-huh.
especially if they make about the same?
Those couples are actually the ones who are most likely to get hit with the marriage penalty.
Oh, how come?
Because when you combine their incomes,
Yeah.
it bumps them up into a higher tax bracket,
Mm.
which means a bigger tax bill.
Okay, so we're starting to see how complicated this is.
Definitely.
And now we got to bring in the whole race and ethnicity piece.
Right. And that's what makes this study so fascinating. What they did was they used this method called imputing
Okay.
to add race and ethnicity data into their analysis of all these tax records.
Interesting.
So they took all these anonymous tax records
Right.
and using some really sophisticated statistics,
Mm-hmm.
they basically made educated guesses about the race and ethnicity of each couple based on other demographic info.
So they could see how these marriage penalties and bonuses were playing out for different racial groups.
Exactly.
Like white couples, black couples, API couples, Hispanic couples, all of that.
You got it. And what they found is that some of those assumptions we've had for a long time
Mm.
might not actually be true.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so while the overall rates of those marriage penalties were pretty similar,
Across all the different groups?
yeah, across the board,
Okay.
things changed a lot when they started looking at things by income level.
Okay, so what happened when they factored in income?
Well, for example, they found that Black and Hispanic couples
Yeah.
who were making more money, they were more likely to get hit with a penalty
Okay.
than white couples in that same income bracket.
Interesting.
But then down in some of the lower income brackets,
Mm-hmm.
it flipped.
You're kidding.
White couples were actually more likely to get penalized. So you can't just say, oh, this group always wins, this group always
Yeah,
loses.
it's way more nuanced than that.
Way more. And it gets even more interesting when you look at the average amounts of the bonuses,
All right.
white and API couples.
Yeah.
They were getting bigger bonuses on average
Wow.
than Black and Hispanic couples.
That's a pretty big difference.
It is, but there's a catch.
Okay, what's the catch?
When they looked at the bonuses as a percentage of
Mm.
each couple's total tax bill,
Yeah.
the bonus was actually bigger proportionally for
Wow.
Black and Hispanic couples.
So even though the dollar amount was smaller, it was a bigger chunk of their overall tax.
Exactly. And that challenges another assumption
Yeah.
that we've had for a while. Some of the older studies,
Mhm.
especially those that use census data,
Right.
they said that Black couples,
Yeah.
because they were more likely to have two working spouses,
Huh.
would consistently face higher marriage penalties
Okay.
than white couples.
So is this study saying that's not true?
It looks like it might not always be the case.
Hmm.
The data from the tax records tells a different story.
So those tax records are painting a more accurate picture
Much more.
of how these penalties and bonuses are really shaking out.
Yeah.
This is reminding me of something really important.
What's that?
When we're looking at data like this,
Mm-hmm.
we got to think critically about where it's coming from
Right.
and how that could be affecting the conclusions we're drawing.
Absolutely.
I'm curious, though, what else did they find out about how different groups are experiencing these marriage penalties and bonuses?
Well, yeah, you're totally right to be thinking about those data sources.
Uh,
The study actually dug into that a bit. Yeah, comparing what they found in the tax records
Mhm.
to the data from the current population survey.
Okay.
That's the CPS, the survey they use a lot in economics research.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out relying on self-reported income,
Okay.
like you get from those surveys,
Yeah.
might not give you the whole picture.
Interesting. So are you saying people might not be totally accurate
Yeah,
about how much they make when they're answering a survey?
it happens more than you think.
Really?
Yeah, sometimes it's an honest mistake,
Right.
sometimes not.
Okay.
But the point is,
Yeah.
those little discrepancies can really mess things up
Okay.
when you're trying to understand something as complex as these marriage penalties and bonuses.
I see.
And the study actually found a pretty big difference
No.
for some income levels.
Mm-hmm.
The CPS data showed way more Black couples with similar incomes
Okay.
compared to the tax data.
Hmm. So if having those similar incomes
Yeah.
usually leads to the marriage penalty, using that survey data could make it seem like Black couples are getting penalized a lot
Yeah.
more
Right.
than they really are.
Exactly. It just goes to show
Yeah.
you really got to pay attention to those limitations
Mm-hmm.
of where your data is coming from
Right.
and how that can change your whole interpretation of what's going on.
For sure. So what did they find
Yeah.
when they looked at the income splits within each racial group,
Yeah.
but using that more accurate tax data?
They went beyond just looking at whether a couple was single income or dual income.
Okay.
They actually broke down how the money was split between the spouses,
Gotcha.
and that's when things got really interesting.
Okay. How so?
Some earlier research, particularly using census data, had suggested that Black couples were
Yeah.
more likely to have two earners making about the same amount
Okay.
across a pretty wide range of income levels.
And we know that having similar incomes can often mean you're more likely to get that marriage penalty.
Uh-huh.
So did the tax data show the same thing?
Not quite. It was true
Yeah.
that Black couples were more likely to have two similar earners in those higher income brackets.
Okay.
But in the lower income levels,
Yeah.
the trend actually reversed.
Really?
Yeah.
How so?
The tax data showed
Mhm.
that in a lot of those lower income brackets,
Yeah.
Black couples were more likely to have one main earner
Interesting.
compared to white couples.
So instead of getting penalized in those cases,
Right.
they might actually be more likely to get the marriage bonus.
Exactly. It really challenges those assumptions
Yeah.
from the earlier research and shows that it's not as clear-cut as people thought.
Right. You can't just make a blanket statement
Yep.
about how any one group is going to be affected by this.
Right. Each group's experience
Yeah.
with these marriage penalties and bonuses
Mhm.
is going to depend on a whole bunch of
Yeah,
factors.
it's moving pieces.
Definitely. And to add another layer,
Okay.
the study found that Hispanic and API couples
We're much more likely to have kids
Okay.
and to be living in families with one main breadwinner.
So does that mean they're also more likely to see that marriage bonus?
It's definitely a possibility. This study really shines a light
Yeah,
on how complicated this all is,
for sure.
and it forces us to look beyond those simple assumptions.
Totally.
It's a reminder that when we're talking about something as important as the tax system,
Mm-hmm.
we have to be really digging deep
Right.
and considering all these different angles.
It sounds like this study is really making us think about how policies that seem neutral on the surface
Yeah,
can actually have different effects on different communities.
absolutely. And that leads to some big questions.
Like what?
Well, if these disparities are real,
Yeah.
is there anything we can do about them?
Mm-hmm.
Can we actually make the tax system fairer,
Right.
more equitable for everybody, no matter their background or how much money they make?
Those are big questions.
They are. Does the study offer any solutions?
Well, this particular study was more about presenting what they found
Okay.
and highlighting areas where we need more research.
I see.
But based on everything we've talked about,
Mm-hmm.
there are definitely some interesting possibilities.
Okay, I'm all ears. What kind of possibilities?
Well, one thing we could do is rethink how tax brackets are set up
Okay.
for married couples.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we adjust those income thresholds where those higher tax rates kick in, specifically for married couples,
Okay.
to even out some of those disparities.
So we'd be making sure that those higher tax rates
Right.
are hitting couples at a level that's actually fair
Yeah, exactly.
and doesn't disproportionately affect certain groups.
That's the idea.
That's interesting. What else?
Another thing we could consider is creating some more targeted tax credits or deductions that are specifically designed to help couples who are most likely to get hit with that marriage penalty, for example.
Yeah.
Some countries have this thing called a second earner deduction, which basically reduces the taxes on the spouse who makes less
Yeah.
in those dual income households.
That seems like it could really help level the playing field
It could.
for those couples who are getting the short end of the stick with the current system.
Right.
But I imagine any time you start talking about changing the tax code, there's a whole bunch of other things you got to think about.
Absolutely. We'd have to look at the impact on things like government revenue, economic growth, and of course, fairness overall.
It's like one of those puzzles where every time you move a piece, it affects everything else.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to be having these conversations, to keep doing the research, and to really think about how these policies are affecting real people.
For sure. This has really been eye-opening for me.
Good.
I'm starting to see how all these technical details about taxes can actually have a huge impact on people's lives.
It's not just numbers on a form.
Right.
It's about how those numbers reflect what's actually happening in people's lives.
Absolutely. So beyond the numbers then, what are some of the broader societal implications of these marriage penalties and bonuses?
That's where things get really interesting.
It's like we've been digging through all this data, and now we're finally coming up for air, and it's like, whoa, what does this all mean for actual people?
Exactly.
It's easy to get lost in the numbers.
Yeah.
But we got to remember, this is about people's lives, their choices, their opportunities.
You've hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
This research goes way beyond just measuring the dollars and cents of these marriage penalties and bonuses.
Right.
It makes us think about all those ripple effects, like how the idea of getting a tax break or getting hit with a bigger tax bill could actually be swaying people's decisions about some pretty major life choices.
It's crazy to think about.
I know, right?
Like the tax code, this thing that seems so technical and boring could actually be affecting whether people get married or how they manage their money as a couple.
It's a question that's been bugging researchers for years.
Really?
Oh, yeah. There's a whole area of study dedicated to figuring out how tax policies change people's behavior. And some of those studies have actually found proof that even small marriage penalties can affect things like marriage rates.
Interesting.
And even when people decide to get hitched.
So it's not just about love and commitment anymore.
Well, hopefully those are still the main reasons.
Right, of course.
But yeah, it is kind of wild to think about how money might be playing a part in all of this.
For sure. And those ripple effects probably go even further than just the decision to get married, right?
Absolutely. Researchers are also looking at how those marriage penalties might be influencing whether women work and what kind of jobs they go for.
You're saying these tax policies could be discouraging women from working altogether.
It's possible.
Or from trying to get those higher paying jobs.
That's one of the things they're looking into. There's some evidence that shows when a woman knows her income is going to be taxed more because it'll be combined with her husband's, she might be less likely to work. Or to go for that promotion because it feels like it's not worth it financially.
That's a pretty big deal.
It is.
We're talking about holding women back from earning more and having more opportunities, all because of how the tax system is set up.
Exactly.
And I bet those effects are even stronger.
Oh, yeah.
For women of color.
Absolutely.
Who already have so many obstacles in their way.
It's a great point.
Yeah.
And it brings us right back to those disparities we talked about earlier with those marriage penalties and bonuses.
Yep.
It's not just about the immediate financial hit.
Yep.
It's about how those disparities are mixed up with all those other inequalities in income, wealth, and opportunity for groups that are already struggling. These tax policies could be making things even harder.
It's like the system isn't just failing to level the playing field. It's actually tilting it even more.
In the wrong direction.
Exactly.
This is a lot to process.
It is.
Where do we even start?
Well, it all starts with awareness.
Okay.
By shedding light on these complicated issues and those unintended consequences.
Yeah.
We could start having more informed conversations about building a fairer and more equitable tax system. This whole deep dive has really made me rethink how I look at taxes.
I'm glad to hear that.
It's not just about filling out forms.
Yeah.
It's about real people's lives.
Absolutely.
So what's the one thing?
I think the biggest takeaway is just to be aware of how complicated all of this is.
Okay.
The tax code might seem all neutral and objective, but it can actually have very different effects on different groups of people.
That's really important to keep in mind.
It is. It's a call to action for all of us to really get involved in these conversations about tax policy, to stay informed and to fight for a system that gives everyone a fair shot.
Well, you've definitely given us all a lot to think about.
Good, I hope so.
It's been great exploring this with you.
The pleasure was all mine. And for everyone listening, keep digging into this issue. Keep those conversations going.
Okay.
And stay curious.
Right.
Because taxes affect every single one of us.
That's the truth. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.
You're welcome.
We'll be back next time with another deep dive into something that matters.
Looking forward to it.
Until then, keep learning and keep asking those tough questions.